code.
Okay. So yeah, topic simple 3D content creation. How much freedom is enough? So what I do is what I just elaborate on is basically if I have you give a white slate, you can use the mouse, you use some sketching interface, and you sketch some user input, and you get a model. Now this is just a simplified view. Obviously you don't get that model from this simple sketch. But ideally you'll get something after a couple of operations that looks something like this, and I always base it on triangle meshes. How is this related to games? So at GDC 2006 we'll write named this game Magic Penguin as one of his main inspirations for the creature creator in Spore. And the software that this was based off of is research by Takeo Gerashi from the University of Tokyo. And Takeo was one of the readers on my thesis. So that's how that's all tied together. So yeah, I just thought that was an interesting thing to see how stuff that is done in research actually gets used in games. It doesn't happen as often as it should, I think. So what's the main motivation for this work? I'd argue that creating models from nothing is difficult. It's like most artists know how to model with clay or how to sketch, but I'd also like people to be able to do this that have no idea how to do it in the first place, that don't have these capabilities. And even if you have a 3D model, using the tools that are on the market right now for the modification of these models is also not really easy. Like there's a lot of different tools like this here where you have to simplify it first, and you move the simplified shape, and then you add the details back on, and then and there's just a lot of buttons. The third motivation is obviously, where I have to bring in the game thing here again, is user-generated content in games. So there's the Spore creature creator, everyone knows it, most people love it. Many people don't think there's really a game behind it, but it's still very popular. And most of these tools are still pretty experimental, but they seem to be resonating. And probably because it's really a lot of fun to use them when it's done right. So the alternatives I'm going to present, so I built two tools for my thesis, and one was called Fiber Mesh. It's for making models out of nothing, and being able to modify the models after you make them just out of nothing. And this is normally an interactive talk where I give demos, so if anyone wants to see this in action, I have it on my laptop and I can show it later, because this is obviously not going to be animated in any way, shape, or form. And the other thing is if you already have a model, I built a tool where you can just rotate the model into place and you somehow reverse sketch a silhouette, and it does a 3D deformation. So these are all tailored for people that just want to scribble on a piece of computer, in that case, and just get some kind of result out of it. And if they don't like it, they can undo it. And it doesn't have millions and millions of buttons. It actually has no buttons at all. So the easiest thing to do is you just sketch a silhouette in this Fiber Mesh tool and just inflates a model. There's a lot of ways of doing this. We have one way of doing it, and it looks something like this. Another simple operation is just scribbling over the entire model and cutting off a part of it. Or you can just scribble a base onto the model, and you can extrude a silhouette, and you get something that looks like an ear or an arm or something like that. One of the things that you notice on the previous slide is that blue curve that you initially sketch as a silhouette stays. So you can actually add to this network of curves that you put onto this model for the modification of the model. You can either do that by just scribbling a sketch onto it, or you can also just like do a cut and do something that looks like a lasso on the whole model. And the reason that's important is at any point you can just grab onto those blue curves and drag it around as if it was a piece of rubber. And it just drags the surface along with it. And again, this does not come across in a still. But it's really cool because it behaves a little bit like a piece of wire. And because a lot of people like tools from Photoshop, we also put in a lot of stuff that looks a little bit like smoothing. Like there's this little rubbing tool where you can rub out little kinks in the curves. You can erase parts of the curve. You can just, take an eraser tool, change stuff. Or you can change the properties from a smooth curve where the surface has to be smooth to sharp, so you can make little creases in the surface like this. And without going into any technical details, this is what we get after we designed the tool. We gave it to an absolute novice user and instructed them about 50 minutes on how to use it, and about 20 minutes to try out. This is what they came up with. And this is what we do as a proof of concept to see that people like it. If people get big eyes, they're all happy, then we usually know we're onto something. And this is what happened with this. More interesting is we gave this to a 2D artist who's really proficient in flash animation, but has never used a 3D modeler before. And he was actually one of the motivations for doing this tool in the first place, because he said it'd be really cool if you could get 3D models just from 3D sketches. And this is what he made after 20 minutes of trying, which I think, which obviously shows that if you know what you're doing, then you can get much more elaborate models. This is something that we got from a user from India who was using this for Blender. So his argument was that most of the tools that he works with doesn't really support creating the initial mesh. So he just used fiber mesh to design the initial mesh in the taco and then imports it into his Blender where he can do all the subdivision, surface modeling, texturing, etc., etc. And this is what it looks like when someone takes that same thing and imports it into ZBrush and does a lot more details on top of the base mesh. But again, like ZBrush and all these Blender tools, Maya, etc., don't really have the notion of creating a base mesh. Second tool I made, SillSketch. Now this is just something, like I'm just going to briefly jump over these steps because this is all the technical details that are boring, because what the user sees is the upper left, where you just rotate the model into place. If you want to extend the nose, you draw that little green line, and you get the result that you see on the bottom right. Or in other words, if you want to create a gigantic ear out of something like this, you just hint at it, and it deforms the mesh accordingly. And to show you what people can do with this is an editing sequence from one of my students in Germany who presented this and actually implemented this for Disney animation. And this doesn't show the sketches that he's placing, but each sequence is about 2 or 3 edits. So from each picture to the next is about 2 or 3 placements of a single sketch. And you see how you can open the mouth, shorten it, and now it starts getting more into the exaggerated view. Then you can, of course, at any point rotate the model in any view and start tapering the mouth, etc., etc. And then you can get from something like this to this with no buttons or no special tools or anything else. So the thoughts I have on this, as I've elaborated on already, is that most of these tools that we use right now are really, really complex and don't support base model creation. But the creature creator in Sport, for example, they really help in giving this to people that don't know what they're doing actually. Like they try to specialize it for the game that they're trying to make it for. But the problem that I always have with is that there's an obvious gap between these two tool sets. And that's basically what I'm trying to do. So the work that everything I work on right now is trying to bridge the gap between very simple tools and the way too complex tools. Because I really think it's important that we have easier to use content creation tools both for in-game content creation as well as for offline content creation. And the main reason for this is that I think it's unlikely that we're going to add less complexity to game rules in the future. And that concludes my talk. Thanks.
At time, those 20 seconds perfect. Any questions for Andrew?
Yeah. Can you define the poly count that is generated from the sketch itself?
It's a user parameter, but we usually try to keep it fairly low so that all the deformations still works interactive. Like we have there's a Java demo online on our website, and you can see that once you go over about 5,000 vertices, it starts, like, it depends on what computer you're working on, but if you're working on like a standard laptop, it starts chugging up to 5K. And it's not optimized at all. Okay. I can show you later. I have a link to the laptop. Yes?
I was just wondering if the code is available.
If you ask me. Yeah, but we're working on a C++, so we have a Java implementation that's a total mess. And we have a C++ implementation right now that's not as much of a mess.
Okay.
We're going to open source it in a couple of months. But you can have it in advance. Thank you.